Hey guys, my name is Jessica and I am a ASHA certified speech language pathologist, and I am a wife and I am a mom, and I am in love with learning about social communication and social communication disorders. As you can probably guess, loving social communication disorders and loving to learn about it, I also happen to be very familiar with autism spectrum disorder, and I have worked with and treated many students with autism. One of the most common questions that I have gotten is, what is the difference between autism and social communication disorder? So before we jump into that, first of all, I just want to say thank you for being here today, and I am so proud of you for taking a few minutes out of your day to hopefully learn something new and get some clarification on something that might be confusing you. I just want to thank you for stopping by my video, and if you happen to learn something different and you like what you find here, I would just love it if you would just subscribe to my channel so that you can keep getting access to more videos like this. Now, let's jump into how is autism and social communication different. To answer this question, what you need to know is, what is the actual definition of autism? So this definition comes from something called the DSM-5. That stands for the American Psychiatric Association makes something called a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So DSM-5. And this is where the criteria for the diagnosis of autism comes from. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to read what the definition from the DSM-5 is for autism criteria. There are actually several different sections, but I'm going to focus on what is relevant to our topic today, and that is going to be section A and section B. So I'm going to read those to you and then I will explain them. So section A of the autism diagnostic criteria is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, and then also restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. Okay, so I read the big technical definition to you. Let's go ahead and break those down a little bit more and talk about exactly what they mean. So section A is the section that talks about deficits in social communication and social interaction. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the individual is having deficits in social emotional reciprocity. That means they're having a hard time participating in a back and forth interaction, a social interaction with somebody. For example, they might have a hard time having a conversation, going back and forth in a conversation. They might have a hard time sharing interests with someone else. They have a hard time understanding emotions or using emotions appropriately. And then they have a difficult time initiating and responding to social interactions. So this is saying that any kind of social interaction, these students are having a difficult time participating in. This section about social communication also talks about deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors. So this could be struggling to understand and to use nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is any kind of communications that's not verbal. This includes things like eye contact. This includes things like using gestures, responding to gestures without a verbal prompt, and being able to interpret body language or understanding how one's own body image or body language, what that might be communicating to somebody else. Also, in this section A, the social communication section, these students have a hard time developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So anything social, basically anything that has to do with an interaction with another person, these individuals are going to struggle with. It's going to be a weakness for them. Okay, and section B This is the section that talks about restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior. So what does that mean? That means these individuals are participating in stuff that we typically call stimming, if you've heard that word before. So any kind of repetitive movement, for example, flapping or jumping, those are all restrictive, repetitive, they're happening repeatedly movements. Also, the DSM says things like lining up toys, flipping objects over, and echolalia also are a type of stereotyped behavior. Also in section B, it talks about, again, restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior. These students have a extreme need for routine, and they have a really hard time breaking a routine. They like things exactly the same every day. They might even have some rituals that they need to do to feel okay. They have rituals that they need to complete. They also have highly fixated, restricted interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. So anything that they might be unusually interested in, for example, vacuum cleaners, or a specific type of animal, or a specific type of car, or a specific game, if they have an unusual and extremely intensely focused interest in this, that is considered a highly restricted and fixated interest. And then the last section of section B, the restricted interest section, is hyper and hyperactivity to sensory input. So what does this mean? This could be things like visual fascination with objects, looking at objects from an unusual way, or sometimes students might really like to listen to the way something sounds, or they might like the way a light looks. So they sit and they watch the light go. It looks a little bit unusual to somebody who's has these hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. Okay, so to review, the definition of autism, the two main sections that we are talking about today are: to meet the autism diagnostic criteria, you need deficits in social communication and you need deficits in these restrictive behaviors. So in order to have autism, you have to have both. Now, social communication can be a disorder on its own. If you have an individual who just has a difficult time with conversation skills and social skills and understanding and using nonverbal skills, but they do not have the repetitive behavioral skills, that person does not have autism. And this can be really tricky to weed out. But ultimately, that's going to be what the big difference is between social communication and autism. All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me as we went through that. I hope you had something to take notes with. I hope that you found this helpful, and understand that this was a very brief summary of both autism diagnosis and social communication. I would love it if you would just like this video, subscribe to the channel if you learned something new. That way, if you want to keep learning some new stuff with me, you'll be notified when new videos come. Also, there's a link in the description to my blog and to my Teachers Pay Teachers store. I would love it if you would check those out so that I can hopefully help you teach your student about social communication.